Today I'm going to be showing you on video how to make a lampshade out of a piece of firewood. The wood I'm using is poplar. This isn't going to be a real big shade, but I'm making some small lamps for a house I'm getting ready to build. Poplar is the only wood that I know of that is transparent. So when you use it as a shade, the light actually goes through the shade. It's really cool. It shows all the grain. I've even got some that had knots in them, and I was able to keep the knots in there, and it looks really cool. I'm going to be mounting this block on a big faceplate. But I'm also going to be using a tailstock on the other end of it to help hold this thing from wobbling. We're going to be turning this thing down to between 1/8 and 3/16 of an inch thick. And I can't have wobble. If it wobbles, I could cut through the side of the shade and it would ruin the shade. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mount the faceplate on the end of the block. I sort of centered it, although these logs aren't completely round, so centering it is kind of a arbitrary thing. I'm using screws that are, I think they're like 1 3/4 long. They're actually Tapcon screws. They're made for going into cement. They got a little different thread on them than a normal screw, and they're really strong because they're meant to go into cement. So I use these on something big like this. This faceplate has, I think, 10 holes in it, and I'll put screws in all 10. I want to keep this thing solid. And while I'm putting this down, I want to make sure that this pulls absolutely tight to this log, because later on, if it's not, it could start to loosen up. And when it does that, then it'll start to wobble. And I kind of go around like you would with a tire, back and forth, not just start one way and go around. And that way I'm pulling things down evenly all the way around. Now I'll thread this onto the spindle of the lathe. And I want to keep the tailstock back a ways, because I got to be able to get my rest where I need it. The tool. And I'll tighten that down. Now I'll set the rest up. And like I said, this is not very round. And when you set the rest, you want to spin this baby to make sure that it's not going to hit that rest. Then I'm going to start out at very slow speed, because with this thing being out of round and out of balance, it could shake this thing up pretty good. As you can see, it's starting to shake the lathe there, so I probably won't go any further than that. What I'm going to use for a tool, it's a bowl gouge, but it's got a modified grind on it. Normally these sides would be up almost straight across here, but this modified design allows me to do a lot of things with this tool without really having to change tools. Another thing I'll use during the course of this is a scraper. I'll explain that when I get to that point. But this particular grind on this bowl gouge works really well for a lot of things. I'm going to be putting this face shield on just to keep the chips out of my face and eyes. At first there's not going to be much for big chips, but after it gets going, it'll start getting to be more and more. When you come into this, my rest is a little high. When I come into this, I have to be very careful, because at this point I'm nearly hitting the rest, but at this point I'm an inch and a half, inch and 3/4 away from it. So I'm just going to be just catching it, and I gotta come in very slow until I start hitting wood. Now, as you can see, I'm hitting here, but I'm not hitting any place else on this log. And until this log is down to where I'm hitting all the way around, it's going to wobble. And I wanna do the entire log till I get it round, because I got to keep this thing running as smooth as I can later on. To start with, I have this blade held at an angle almost straight up and down, and it's just gouging out wood as it goes. I'll turn that to a different angle as I'm doing different things, but for now, to get this thing round, that's what I'm doing. I want to keep moving my rest in, because I don't want to hang the tool off the side of the rest any more than I have to. So I'll keep adjusting that. Normally when I'm turning, I would be more up in front of it like this, but I don't want to block the camera, so I'm kind of hanging back a little bit. Makes it a little tougher to control the knife, but it'll be all right. As you can see, I'm probably about halfway around hitting that. So once I get this thing round, then I can really dig in there and make some chips fly. I'm going to try speeding her up a little bit. The faster she goes, the faster she'll be able to cut. Can't speed her up much, though. Okay, I'm not round yet, but I'm going to move down the log just to try to get this thing to where it's getting more balanced. As you can see here, it's actually getting round at this point. It's this end that needs most of the work. And it's because this thing is kind of oval shaped instead of round. They were starting to get there. What I'm going to do here is a little unusual. I don't usually do this. But I'm going to square off this edge. And I'm going to take this thing back off of the lathe. And I'm going to put the faceplate on this side because the opening of the shade is going to be down here and the top will be up here. And this is turning out to be too thin down here. So I want to switch it around. But I'm going to square this off first so it'll run truer. Okay, I got that shaved off. Now I'm going to switch that plate. Now I'm running this kind of on a 45 instead of straight up and down. I'm running it more like this, and I'm pushing it through sideways. And I can take about 1/4 of an inch at a time off. Now, as you can see, I'm pretty much round now. Now I can start shaping this lampshade. I can probably speed it up a little more too. Now I'm gonna spin this around and I'm gonna square this edge off because there's a gouge out of this you can see right here. So when this gets squared off, that'll determine actually where the shade starts. That gives us the width of the shade, the diameter of the shade, however you want to say it. Got a little knot up in here. This could be cool. We can keep that in there. Might be a little too tall. Might not be in there when it's done. Now I'm going to try to shape this thing. What I'm doing now is I'm actually turning this thing sideways, and I'm using the edge of this almost like a scraper would. And as you see, that smooths it out pretty good. Another pass or two. I'm going to have to take down a little bit more here to get my taper right. But another pass or two and she'll be in pretty good shape. Now I am going to use a scraper. It's got kind of a curved surface on it. I'm going to use this to just smooth that out as good as I can. The rest we'll get with sanding. All right. The rest of that I can get later on when it dries a little bit with some sandpaper. Now we're going to go into the hollowing out part. All right, we're going to start the hollowing out process. This is the critical part. I've had these things blow apart before on me. You get down and you spend a few hours working on it and it blows apart. Kind of sucks a little bit, but I just put a little ridge in there like that so that it doesn't make my tool skip when I start in there, because that happens. I'm using the same tool and I'm coming in about at a 45 and then working it across. And I take the scraper and I use it to kind of make the wall straight. Then I'll go in with the other. If I get too aggressive, hanging out from the rest as far as it is, it starts to chatter. You can hear it and you can see it in the knife. As you can see, it takes it out pretty good. You'll notice the heartwood, and this is quite a bit darker than the outside. What we want to do is we want to take this down. We want to keep the walls of this thing as consistent as we can. Otherwise, when it starts to dry, it'll dry in the thinner parts before the thicker parts, which will cause it to warp and to crack. And we don't want that. So I'm taking it down heavy. I want to get the bulk of this out of here. Then I can get rid of this and I can get in there better. I'm going to try to move my rest around so I'm not hanging out quite as much as I am now. But I don't have a whole lot of room to work here. Coming along pretty good. I'm going to see if I can readjust this rest a little bit. You don't want to hang that tool out any more than you have to. When you're doing this, you don't have a whole lot of choice and you don't have a whole lot of room. I'm trying to do this so I don't block your view with the camera. It's really hard to do this without getting in the way of the camera. This wood is very wet. Now, as you can see, we're about here. So we got at least another 2.5 inches or so to go in. It's going to get really tight. But once I feel like there's enough weight off of this thing, then I'll get rid of this and pull the tailstock out of the way. But I don't want to do it too soon and have this thing start wobbling. As you can see, it's shaving ribbons. It's just so wet and it's just clinging inside. Doing these lampshades makes a ton of sawdust. Now, I've had people say, oh, you're wasting all that wood, but it's poplar. It's not really good for firewood, so I can make something neat out of it. Why not? Okay, I think I'm going to back this off and see how she runs without the tailstock. And if she's running smooth, then I'm going to get rid of this tailstock. Yeah, she's running smooth. So I'll cut that center out now, which will get even more weight off of it. Now I can get rid of the tailstock. I got a little more room to work. And now we can see a whole lot better. All right, now the biggest thing we got to do now is we got to bring this thing down thin, but we got to bring it down evenly so that it doesn't get wider as it goes back. And it's really tough sometimes to do that, but that's what we got to do. And now I'm going to set up a light. As you can see, the light shines through that wood. And by shining a light on there like that, I can get a better idea of how thick the wood is by how much light's coming through it. It's not foolproof because some parts of the wood shine better than others anyways. So it's not foolproof. But it gives you a good indication. I'm trying to set the light so that you guys can see it, but I got to be able to see too. What's working for you is blinding me. That's going to have to do, I guess. See how it's lighter here? Not so light here. This means this is thicker here. Which I want to be, this thing is tapered, so I can't just go straight. So I got to be very careful. See how this is much lighter in here than it is back here, which means this is thicker. So I got to take this down even more in the back. But this is getting really at the critical point. I'm got to be really, really careful at this point. It's still a little bit thick, but I got to leave room for sanding because I don't want this thing to be, it doesn't need to be perfect sanded, but I need it to be somewhat sanded. I'm going to leave this. I'm going to leave this on for a while on slow speed. And dry this a little bit so it sands a little bit easier. And I'm going to sand the outside and get it nice and smooth. And then I'll see where I'm at on the inside. I think I'm pretty close to where I want to be right now. With the sanding, it'll take off another at least 1/16. So, if once I get the outside sanded, if I think the inside is still too thick, then I'll take it down a little more. But I want to sand it first. And right now it's pretty wet, so I can't do that. So we'll be back in a bit. I'm going to start sanding this now. I put the lathe in reverse because what happens, this is how it normally goes, and when you're running a knife across there, you're laying the fibers down. And if you sand that way, it makes the fibers, it just keeps laying them down. But if you reverse it, now it catches them fibers and lifts them up, and they come off much easier. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper. I have a system here. It's dust collection system. That's what this bag is right here. But I can't talk over that, so I'm not going to use that for this. I'm going to take a piece of wood and I'm going to wrap the sandpaper around it. And then when I put it on here, it'll help straighten out anything that might be a little bulge or a gap. And I'm not going to do that on the inside, but I'll do it on the outside. The inside's not that critical, but you want it looking good on the outside. This will also, the sanding will also help dry this out. This wood was really wet. Now I'll go to a piece of 120. good you can see in there, but it looks pretty good. The only thing I got to do is I got to check and see how thick this is up there compared to this, because I don't want a big difference. It'll crack and warp on me. So I'm going to drill a little tiny hole up in here, which I'm going to use the parting tool to get rid of anyways. But that'll give me an idea how thick that is. I'm going to keep this thing turning because I don't want the heat in one spot, and this is a heat lamp. Okay, now I can see by the light shining through there that I'm back down into here. So I'm going to drill a hole right in here, which later on when I run the parting tool, it'll cut that out of there. But it'll give me an idea how thick that is, because I don't want this too thick, and I don't have a set of calipers that will slide all the way that far back in. So that's how thick it is back there, which it's just a fraction thicker than it is out here, but not much. I don't think it's enough that I can worry about too much. Maybe I'll sand in there just a touch more, and then I should be good. I'll sand back in here too a little bit. You can see it's almost perfect now. I'm going to hand rub a little bit of mineral oil on this. I'm just going to rub it in by hand. The only reason I'm using mineral oil is because that's what I use on my bowl, and I have it. You could use other things on it too, but it just helps preserve the wood. Maybe keep a little moisture in there somewhat, so that it maybe will help keep it from cracking. I also found that it actually makes it more transparent when it's coated with oil. Not sure why, but it does. It's just about the same exact thickness there as it is there, which is good. I'll just clean this edge up slightly with a piece of sandpaper, and then I'll hit that top edge with a little bit of oil. Here's another lamp that I made with a lampshade. You'll notice it has a knot in it. And that knot is only like 1/8 of an inch thick, and somehow it stayed in there. Pretty wild. This is the finished lamp in my bedroom. It's kind of cool.